God, I can't even believe it's 2022. I just was productive and recorded a tarot video for the week ahead, so now I'm going to do a video that I actually want to do. No, I'm just kidding. I love doing my tarot videos. I really do enjoy them. I just feel like I have this conversation every week. I just want to do more. And then I just don't. And then I complain about it. So we have a very healthy relationship, you and I. Let's look at all the books I've read in 2022 and let's talk about them, because I want to be honest with you. There's a lot of books that I've DNF'd this year. That stands for Goodreads Talk for Did Not Finish. And it's just because my attention span is like a goldfish lately. As much as I want to force myself to read books and give them a chance, I've noticed about myself that if I do not resonate or I do not feel interested in the book, like I need to turn the next page by page 100, I usually don't ever end up feeling like I change my mind later on in the book. So now I have kind of this toxic rule of thumb where I'll read the first 100 pages, and usually by the first 100 pages I'll be super sucked in or I just won't be engaged at all. I think I've only actually read like through the whole cover, like page to page, cover to cover, is 1, 2, 3, 4 books. I need to do better. First book that I tried to read January 9th was Chuck Palahniuk. I usually don't hate Chuck Palahniuk, but I also have never really finished a complete book of his that I enjoyed.
I watched Fight Club and I was like, I should read his books.
And I've never actually enjoyed his books. And this one's called Haunted. Now this one is like supposed to be a bunch of short stories that are like disturbing and stuff. The thing about Chuck Palahniuk's Haunted is it felt like a run-on sentence that was just going nowhere. I mean, some of it was just really randomly disturbing and unnecessary, and then like shock value-y, and then it would just like end and it was abrupt, and I could have lived my whole life without it, and that's how I feel about it. And the next book I read was My Year of Rest and Relaxation. Now I was really excited about this book because the author is Persian, and that means a lot to me because I don't ever read books written by Persian women. This author tends to like to write in the perspective of like villains or like anti-heroes. This book specifically, she's in the perspective of like a very affluent, rich, thin white girl that lives in New York City, has affluent upbringing, and it's called My Year of Rest and Relaxation. And I loved this book. Did it trigger my depression?
Like slightly, maybe.
This is a girl that basically self-medicates and takes a lot of sleeping pills and just like continues to like try to sleep as many days as possible. Very destructive. This girl went through a lot of trauma growing up. I think her parents passed away, I'm pretty sure. So she goes through like a lot of just like trauma of being kind of like essentially dead inside in a lot of ways. It's like kind of wastes her life away in a sense. Like she goes through her whole 20s just trying to like sleep them away. The dialogue is very like dramatic and morbid, kind of like Margaret Atwood vibes, if that makes sense. Less good guy with a cause and more of just fucking hate the world. So that's the vibe of that book, and I really liked it because it was just interesting to see that kind of perspective. For some reason it did trigger me a little bit because the person is, you know, it does touch on drugs, it does touch on bodies and eating habits and things like that, and it was pretty intense, but I enjoyed it. My attention span is so bad lately that if I can sit through a book, I'm happy. It has like an ocean ending, by the way, like a really unexpected plot twist. You can kind of see how it could lead up to it. Like I wouldn't say it's necessarily completely unpredictable, but the ending is very like ocean. I think the whole book you're just kind of like seeing like how much this person is going to implode, and they do in such a like luxuriously snobby way that I think it just keeps you entertained in a sense throughout the book. I can't really explain it, you just have to read it. This book I read, which I know I've talked about recently or I know I've like reviewed, and it's Get a Life, Chloe Brown. It's one of the Brown sisters trilogy, and I'll be honest, I didn't really like the writing style or the romance. Like I didn't really think I thought the guy was kind of annoying, and I really empathized with Chloe Brown. I really empathized with the trauma she endured, the things that she was struggling with, and also I feel like whether this book is something I liked or disliked, like this book needed to be written. This book, this representation of people who have disabilities and, you know, people who aren't white and thin, you know, it's about a bigger black girl with a disability, and that book needs to be written, and that needs to be a romance novel, and people should go out and read it. And I do want to read the other books because I heard that every single character in the trilogy is very unlike one another. another. The trilogy follows 3 sisters, and I meet the other sisters in this book, and they seem like each very, very unique in their own way. So I'm interested to read the second book. I just didn't like the romance. It wasn't necessarily that I didn't like the story or the plot. The guy. That's basically it. The guy was just very cheesy. I wanted to like it, but I didn't like it. Next book I read was Ship by Angie Hockman, and I remember like really liking this book and wanting to really like this book, but then it just got really annoying all of a sudden, or just like flatlined for me. It was weird because I remember actually really feeling like I was going to love this book and then being so surprised when I didn't, because it's like about 2 people that are in kind of like social media, like business strat, kind of like dealing with algorithms and things like that for a living, and they go to a tropical island and have a cute meet cute and are basically in competition with one another and like fall in love that way. And I thought that would be so for me because I literally do social media and content creation for a living. So I was super thinking like, oh, this is going to be the book for me, it's going to be amazing. And then when it got really non-judgmental way, some romances are just so white, you know? And I know you're looking at my pale ass face and you're thinking, what are you talking about? But like, you know, for me, I was raised by immigrants from Iran and from the Philippines, and like, even though I'm albino, like I was raised by people who have very drastically different upbringings than if I came from 2 sides or lineages of just white Americans that have like ancestry of white European ancestral ties or something. It's just a very different perspective. So I might be able to like enjoy a lot of books that were written with white protagonists and love interests and things like that, but there's some books where it's just so, I can't explain it. There's just a certain like privilege about a certain kind of person's understanding of the world. It just feels hard to relate to. It just feels shallow. I don't know. It's just, there's not enough depth, okay? That's an extra way to say this. I might have to like crop out half this. But yeah, basically there was a lot of depth in the characters. They were very unrelatable. Very like, their life just seems very easy. I do know like Ship did talk about someone going through something, but I really forget, honestly. And then the next book I did was I reread The Love Hypothesis, and 10 out of 10, although I did notice I didn't like it as much the second time around, which was surprising to me. I don't know if it's because I already knew everything that was gonna happen or what, but I was surprised because like that book is my baby and I'm proud. Okay, so the next book that I read, and technically the last book that I fully completely read, is Crying in Hmart. This is the best book of 2022 for me. This is I don't think I'm going to read a book that beats this book this year. This is recording this April 1st of 2022, so I'm interested to see if I'm gonna be able to come back to this and change my mind later. Crying in Hmart was the most beautiful, hauntingly beautiful, and just in-depth book about loss, love, life. More specifically, it's about a girl whose mother is diagnosed with cancer, and the mom is from Korea, and I believe the author, who was actually Japanese Breakfast, the band, the singer, the author is born in Korea, but basically super Americanized, grew up in America, like speaks English, you know, just Americanized. So she doesn't have family in America apart from her mother that is Korean. Those are her only Korean ties, and her dad is white. Now, when her mom gets cancer, she's going through this whole, how do I say this, recalibration of who she is. Like, what are her roots? Where are her roots? Because it's kind of like watching your roots get completely rubbed away in a sense, and it's like going through this internal struggle of feeling like there is an ethnic erasure on your identity. Now, this hit me hard because when I like grew up as a kid, I was raised by a lot of very, very elder Iranian immigrants, Persians, like Middle Eastern people, and my only living relative that is from the Philippines currently has Parkinson's and dementia, so I can't even talk to them anymore. My elders that were Persian, like they all have died. My grandpa specifically had pancreatic cancer, and I was the one that was his #1 caregiver. No one else was in the house with us when he was going through that. So it hit me on an extremely intimately personal note. Like, my mother is super Americanized. Like, she came here when she was 3. She's not like someone who's very super in touch with her roots because her dad was schizophrenic and her mom was dead. So she didn't grow up with Persian parents, even though she had Persian parents. Like, she grew up with her dad, but her dad was just not, he was the kindest man of my whole life, but he just, you know, he would be in his own world in a sense. So my mom doesn't really have roots, and so when the elders in our family passed away, like my great grandma and things like that, like we never celebrate Persian New Year anymore. We never do anything that like ties us to Iran, or we don't practice anything that like feels culturally enriching for us. And I just grew up remembering like all of the big celebrations we used to have as a family that I now no longer know how to connect with. I don't speak Farsi fluently. I don't know how to make the food. I don't know how to do do a lot of the things. So basically, like when I was reading Crying in hmart, I was trying really hard to like not make it about me. I do feel like it really hit me on a core level that I've never been able to put into words. So it was probably genuinely the most beautiful book, but also the hardest to relive, because like if you are someone that has had to lose someone to cancer, or anyone who has had to lose anyone, especially if, you know, you're not European, white, Americanized, and you came from a lineage of immigrants or something, then I think this is just, it's a beautiful book no matter who you are, what your background is, period. But I definitely think it's going to hit you harder if you have similar things that are going to strongly resonate you to this book. I want everyone to read this book. It's super raw and vulnerable, and it's not just 100% depressing. I don't want to scare you away from reading it, but it's just like a really good depiction of someone struggling to figure out who they are in their 20s, and they're going through all these really huge obstacles. And I just feel like what other thing is good to read right now that y'all can't relate to than that premise alone. So yeah, 10 out of 10. I really want everyone to read that book. That's like the best book I've read so far. I don't even like books that aren't romance novels. This book is not a romance novel, and look at me go, liking and reading and enjoying books that aren't just Mr. Darcy, you know, Pride and Prejudice vibes. The next book I tried to read was The Paris Apartment. I could really try to get into that if I wanted to. It's just one of those whodunit books, and it was very like all over the place. I love Lucy Foley. I read The Guest List, and I thought that was such an amazing book, like 10 out of 10. Chef Kiss, it's about like a wedding, a vacation wedding, and there's a lot of like mystery around it, and a lot of like kind of, it feels like it's like a wedding written by Margaret Atwood. So like very like morbid, who's done what, everyone has a secret. I don't know, I really loved that book. But this book, Paris Apartment, it's supposed to be about like a murderer in an apartment complex or something, but I just didn't, I could have fallen asleep. That's how I feel about that. So I didn't finish that. And then I tried to read The Kissing Game, but I do not like books where the minute you try to open the book and like understand the premise of what's going on, you're just like shoved into the middle of a conversation. It feels like you like walked into a room and invaded someone's privacy. Like I don't know what's going on, and there's no one here that's going to explain a backstory to me. I'm gonna get annoyed. I'm gonna just stop reading. And then the next one I tried to read was The Maid, who has kind of a similar premise to The Paris Apartment. I think it's like there's a killer in a hotel or something like that, and people are trying to figure out who did it. I don't know, it's just written kind of like the last two books I just described. Snoozy, no, like very like, I don't know, actually I did read some of the reviews for The Maid, and I do feel like people were kind of canceling it because I think the author was trying to depict characteristics of autism and neurodivergence in the main character of the novel in very degrading ways, I guess. So, which I guess now that I have that kind of preface and looking back at when I tried to read it, I can see where they're coming from, but I only read like 2 pages. I couldn't. So anyways, overall that completes this video. Comment below and tell me if you even paid attention this long, what you thought about any of those books, and I will see you in my next video.